Hey guys, this is John and I'm playing vishwa78 in the 15-minute pool on ICC. Let's play as Sicilian against vishwa78. So no Chinny today. Had a really interesting game against her yesterday. I'm going to play b6 against this variation, the c3 Sicilian. This is a specialty line I've played before. The idea is to put the bishop on b7, but not capture on d4 yet, if at all. Because if black were to capture on d4 and white takes back with their c-pawn, white gets to seamlessly develop the knight to c3. So this is a line I actually picked up by looking through some games of Grandmaster Johann Helston, seemingly a random grandmaster. But I learned to play the Sicilian Con by looking at this book by Helston about it. And I was just curious about his repertoire. And he didn't discuss the c3 Sicilian in this book on the Sicilian Con, but I looked up his games in ChessBase and I found him playing this b6 line against c3, and I kind of liked it. Subsequently found out it's a favorite of, or was a favorite of, the late Grandmaster Tony Miles. So, okay, so queen c2 to defend this pawn. Queen seems a little bit misplaced here. Now I can take on d4, and if he takes back with the c-pawn, which he probably will, I can play knight c6. Idea, if knight f3, I have knight b4, forking the queen and bishop. So let's do that. Because if I fork the queen and bishop, I just stand to win the e4 pawn. I mean, if knight f3, knight b4, they move their queen, I take d3, they take with the queen, bishop takes e4, that's a clean pawn right there. So, yeah, there's no reason not to play this move. This is what can happen if white's inattentive in the first few moves in this line. They can fall victim to something like this. Yeah, so now I can take.
Check.
And I'll probably take with the bishop. Could take with the knight too, but I think bishop takes makes more sense. Also, it limits what the queen can do, because probably the queen wants to stay in contact with the knight. Yeah, for the draw. Yeah, I'm not going to be taking that draw. Okay, so queen here. Now, this knight is coming to c3, almost certainly. So I kind of just want to play e6, and then after knight c3, drop my bishop back, and then quickly play bishop e7. I suppose I could also fianchetto my dark square bishop. I could play g6, knight c3, bishop back to b7, and then bishop g7. I could also play bishop takes b1. But I like my light square bishop. I don't necessarily want to just give it away. I can't prevent them from castling. So e6, knight c3. Let's even say bishop d5. I think bishop d5 is plenty good too. Probably b7 though. They castle, bishop e7. Yeah, that's just a pawn. Okay, let's go here. Castle's first. Okay. We'll just continue as planned. So I could take on f3. You might think like, well, why don't you make that even trade? You're up a pawn. Don't you want to simplify when you're up material? And the answer is yes, generally you do want to simplify, but my light square bishop is so powerful on this diagonal, it's unopposed because I eliminated their light square bishop on move 8, that I don't want to give this up for free. And there's still a lot of game left to be played, and I think this is going to be a valuable piece. So, you know, bishop takes f3 would still leave me with a significant advantage, but my advantage is even bigger by keeping this light square bishop. So he's probably putting the bishop on b2. I'll just skedaddle with my king. Just get out of dodge. And then probably rook c8 is sensible. Yeah, I think just occupy the file. I kind of want to watch the move d5. Like, I don't think d5 is ever any good for them. It wouldn't make sense to sacrifice another pawn, but if it opened the line of the bishop towards my king, I would want that to be on my radar. Okay, so I can play knight d5 now. offering a trade of knights. That's actually probably a good idea. So knight d5, knight takes, bishop takes, rook takes c8, queen takes c8. They can occupy the file with rook c1, but I get queen b7 in with an attack on the long diagonal. Yeah, that's just a tremendous position, I think. What else could I do? I could play d6 and go queen d7. Play this kind of slowly, but I like the look of this move. So I'll do it. Let's pre-move bishop takes. Pretty sure they'll play that move. Let's pre-move rook takes c8. I'm pretty sure they'll play that. And then after rook takes c8, queen takes c8, rook c1, I would assume. Oh no, he's trying to be savvier. Okay. But I was debating if he did take and I take and plays rook c1, whether to play queen b7 or queen a6, because I think they both have merit. So if I take, he's, I think, indicating he's going to take with the queen. I could play bishop b4 and try to force them to take on c8, but I don't really like that so much. I think just rook takes c8 here is fine. d6 once again, but nah, I think just take here. And I can always play queen over to b8 and try to get my rook to c8. The only thing he has is like some temporary control of the c file, but it won't amount to anything as long as I'm careful. I actually kind of like queen a8 in this position. Queen a8 just highlighting the attack here. Yeah, let's try that. The position is very safe for me, so I can get away with doing something extravagant like this. Queen b8 would be more normal, I would say. But bishops are long-range pieces, and you have to use them as such. So queen-bishop battery, working down this diagonal. Yeah, so he occupies the c-file, but he can't really do anything with the c-file. He can come into d6, but that's a pretty easy threat for us to parry. I'm thinking bishop d6 here, just so he can't come into c7 altogether, and kind of like putting the bishop on this diagonal too, like maybe bishop f4 would be useful. Yeah, let's do that. And I control all of these infiltration squares that he can attempt to bother me on. It'll be hard for white to find something useful to do in this position. Okay, yeah, so he's somewhat ceding the c-file now because I can play rook c8. I can also just play bishop takes f3, can't I? Okay, so maybe his last move was just a flat-out blunder. Bishop takes f3, g takes f3, queen takes. d5 is the only active move I can possibly see him playing there. Bishop f4, queen c3. Gets a little bit of play. Hard to believe that I'm not going to play bishop takes f3 here, though. Bishop takes f3, g takes, queen takes, d5. Because if he doesn't play for d5, his position is going down in flames. I could even play e5 if I really wanted to there.
Draw.
He offers another draw. Just because I'm thinking doesn't mean I'm going to take your draw, Vishwa. Bishop takes f3, g takes f3, queen takes f3, d5. It's annoying. It's a little annoying because it's a line opening move. But bishop f4. If queen d4, I have e5. So I think queen c3 would be basically forced after bishop f4. And then I can check on g4, guarding the pawn on g7. And then after his king moves, I'm free to take the rook on c1. Okay, so I'm going to run through that calculation one more time. So bishop takes f3, g takes f3, queen takes f3. d5, I think, is the only active try for him. I play bishop f4, skewering his queen and his rook. If he goes queen d4, I have e5, blocking the diagonal with tempo. So instead of queen d4, let's say queen c3. I would love to take his rook, but I would get mated on g7 if I do that. If I take his queen, he would play rook takes c3. So after bishop f4, queen c3, I have this move queen g4 check because the g file is open. There's no g2 pawn, remember. He moves his king, and then I take on c1. And there's no mate on g7 thanks to my queen on g4. So I think that line checks out. So we're going to go for it. Let's see if it plays out, as I think it might. He could play other moves here, like rook c3 or something, but if he plays rook c3, I might plop the queen on d5, and he's never getting d5 in. So the bishop f4 threat is pretty significant. So now I'm up 2 pawns. My rook isn't participating yet, but 2 pawns are 2 pawns. And if he has any difficulty attacking something here, he's just losing, which seems to be the case. He can't really do too much. Okay, he's offering a trade of queens, but that would repair his structure. Kind of think I might want to avoid that trade. He offers another draw. I definitely subscribe to the theory that you shouldn't offer more than 1 draw in a row. If you offer a draw and your opponent doesn't take it, I mean, don't be that guy who keeps offering draws. It's just common courtesy to offer 1 draw and leave it at that if your opponent wants to play. Okay, so I'll probably play queen d5. I'm thinking this is still a good move. Because I could trade, and again, like trading makes perfect sense. I'm sure it'd be winning. I could actually have traded and played f5, maybe. But I like my queen, and I don't like repairing his structure. I don't feel like doing him any favors. So one thing I'm considering now is playing f5 and lifting my rook up through f6 to attack his king. He might get a useless check-in on c8, but otherwise his position is, devoid of any counterplay. I think I will play f5. I like this move.
Draw.
Draw offer times 4 or 5. I think that was the 5th draw offer.
Draw.
So what is he going to do about rook f6 to g6? There's not much he can do. My position is completely secure. It's hard for him to even offer a queen trade now. Rook d1 was far too passive. He didn't have much in the way of counterplay, but rook d1 was not helping his cause. Could have jumped on the c file too if I wanted, but... Okay, so now rook f6. We're headhunting the king. Going after the big kahuna. If king here, I would not only have a check here, but also h2 would be hanging. And it looks like his king is going to have to bail towards the center. So if king f1, I'd probably play even just rook h6 is a good move. I'd probably play rook g6, actually. Rook h6, maybe queen g5. They can bother me with queen d8 check. Okay, so he does go towards the center. Yeah, I'm thinking rook g6. It's just a nice move right now. Along with bishop takes h2, but there's no rush. Just increase the pressure. Stopping counterplay, no queen g5. So one plan I have now is to check him on g2 with my queen. He moves his king, and then lift my rook up to g4. And try to check him on e4. He'll be on the run. Also, just bishop takes h2 is very plausible. Like bishop takes h2, I'd be helping rook g1. That's a third pawn in the bag. Doing okay on time. 6:36, that's more than enough to win this position. Queen d3, okay. Maybe he's trying to come to c4. So check on g2, king here, rook e4. It's pretty, or rook g4 rather. It's pretty effective. Yeah, that will win.
Check.
Without any trouble. Once I get both of my major pieces involved, it's hard to believe he has any sort of defense now. And queen f3 is losing to rook e4 check. The rook e4 move is unstoppable. If he runs with his king, I win f2 instantly. Yeah, that move's just losing to this.
Check.
And he resigned. All right, so let's take a look at that game. So as I said, b6 is a specialty line. I like it. I think it's a little risky for over-the-board play, but in blitz games and rapid games like this, I would have no reservations about recommending it. The idea is after d4 to play bishop b7, but not yet to take on d4. You're attacking the e4 pawn, you're inconveniencing their development. The thing you want to avoid, a lot of people do this, they'll play some deviation of this b6 line, and then they'll do this and allow the knight to come to c3 seamlessly. You don't want that position. That's too easy for white to play. So you want to fire at the e4 pawn from a distance and try to force them to defend it in some undesirable way. They could play d5 here. We actually now have more like a Benoni type position. Black can play knight f6, and after, let's say, bishop d3, e6, and start undermining white's center. So I think bishop d3 is probably the best move. I think that's what he played, right? Yeah, bishop d3, knight f6, attacking the pawn again. And queen c2 is definitely a mistake. If they play knight d2, then at this point we would take on d4, because the knight can no longer go to the c3 square. And one thematic line is knight c6, attacking this pawn, knight gf3, knight b4, attacking the bishop. If the bishop retreats to e2, they would lose the e4 pawn. So bishop b1, and black can play bishop a6 now and stop white from castling. And black has a little initiative. Very likely that, let's say, a3.
Check.
Very likely that black will get the bishop pair and still prevent white from castling. So white has to exercise some care. They have to know what they're doing in this line. Like after knight f6, queen e2 is a pretty reasonable move. Again, delaying the development of this knight so that if take, and then here they can play knight f3. Although I think even here knight b4 is kind of accomplishing the same thing that I set out to in the game, win their light square bishop. So I do know of a line or two that is pretty good against this for white, but I'm not going to say what it is because I can't reveal everything, especially about a line that I play from time to time over the board. So if you're an Alapin player, you play the c3 Sicilian as white, you might have to do a little research on this line. Just saying. So knight f6, yeah, and queen c2 played pretty quickly too. Yeah, I didn't spend a whole lot of time on that, but after take and knight c6, I think black is already doing extremely well. Yeah, about a half pawn advantage to black already. The engine suggests that he moved the queen again to defend the pawn. That does rule out knight b4, so it makes some sense. e5. Black's development is worth something here. So he played knight f3, and now I just get to win a pawn.
Check.
Take with the bishop. Queen moves, yep, e6. And now we preserve the bishop. Yeah, I was pretty sure the engine was going to agree with my decision, but let's see how much the eval drops if we take on f3. It'll still be probably minus... That's an interesting question, actually. I bet it'll be minus 1.05 or something if I take on f3. Let's see what it says. So if take, queen takes. I was pretty close. Thinks black's position. Okay. But yeah, it drops the eval by about a half pawn. Because that light square bishop is valuable. There's no reason to trade it for this do-nothing knight on f3. Now that we've eliminated their light square bishop, we want to keep ours. So that trumps the war of attrition that we might otherwise be engaging in up the pawn. And now just simple moves. Rook c8 here. I could put the pawn on d6, but I kind of like keeping this diagonal open for my bishop. So hence knight d5, take, bishop takes. Rook c3 kind of surprised me. I thought he was going to go here and then rook c1. Now I was debating between queen b7 and queen a6. Originally I think I was intending queen b7, but I started looking at queen a6 because that gains a tempo on the a pawn. And after he defends it, like say here, like then I can play rook c8 and there's no trouble on the c file at all. Even if he does get the c file, it's not a big deal, but I'd rather be able to do something with my rook too. So instead he played rook c3. I just took with the queen. Yeah, engine likes queen a8. Queen bishop battery. He went rook c1. Now bishop d6. I like this move. And maybe he should plow ahead and play a move like knight e5. Just kind of encouraging me to take. It's probably still very bad for him, but yeah, d5. Now there's some threats to consider. Discovered attacks on g7. Still totally losing, but you might want to try for something like that. Because otherwise he just has nothing to work with here, down the pawn and facing the bishop pair. This is actually an almost identical scenario I have in my blitz game that I'm posting today against Grandmaster Bokharov, where I was in like Vishwa's shoes. Like I was a pawn down and I had bishop and knight versus my opponent's two bishops, and it was just torture. So playing against the bishop pair makes it even worse. I mean, you can see he's a pawn down, but the eval is like over -2, so his position is bad too. That tends to happen though. I mean, if you're a pawn down, it's not often the engine is just going to say +1 or -1. Being the pawn down can compound other problems in your position. Yeah, and queen d2, I don't know what that was about, but that just drops another pawn. If he didn't make that blunder, though, let's just say he plays something, I don't know, let's just pass for him. We'll play a move like h3. I wasn't entirely sure how I was going to play this. I do still like the look of f5 with maybe an eye towards playing rook f6 in here, but if he has queen c8 check at the ready as soon as my rook comes up to f6, I may be less likely to do that. I did mention bishop f4. I kind of like the fact that I have this possibility because, you know, if his knight moves, I just take on g2. That's fine and dandy. But if rook here, I'm thinking like maybe at some point I can do this. Just so long as d5 isn't troubling. d5 again, opening up this attack. So I'm not sure how I would have played it. I probably would have played like a waiting move of my own, like h6 maybe, just because I have all the time in the world. Another plan I could do is like at some point play my bishop back to b7 and then play rook c8 and seek a trade. Again, I'd have to do that at a time when bishop b7 is not met by d5 with any sort of effect for white. So queen d2, and I took on f3. Yeah, and he's down the two pawns. I did that piece of calculation with d5, just trying to open lines. But you guys heard my line that I kind of reeled off there. Bishop f4, queen c3, trying to trade queens. And then queen g4 check, key move, defending the g7 pawn. And after his king moves somewhere, we can take on c1. And there's no danger at all to black. It's just a win. So he didn't do that, though. He played queen e3. And again, we've been talking about trades and the role that they play when you're trying to convert an advantage. And I think this game kind of shows, even though you've been taught from a young age in chess, a lot of us have, that when you're ahead in material you want to trade. You can see that's not always the case. So again, let's check the eval. Let's see if it drops. So the engine's suggesting I check on g4. I played this move. And doesn't like it as much, but it's still plenty winning. Let's just see like what it thinks about this. It dropped a little bit compared to my move, not a whole lot. I mean, after f takes e3, I can play this f5 move, which is nice. But he gained something from that transaction. That wasn't a totally even trade. He fixed his pawn structure a little bit. I'm really kind of splitting hairs with this one. Like, queen takes e3 is perfectly fine. It wins for black. But you just have to be aware, like, any trade that you make in chess, ideally, you're at least coming out even on that trade, positionally speaking. And hopefully you're making good trades and you're extracting value from your opponents and not vice versa. And the value he's trying to extract here is he wants to help his pawn structure. And I didn't see a reason to allow him to do that. So queen d5 also blocks his d-pawn, which is really nice. Now this idea, f5, activating the rook up through the f-file. And he has very little to do. There's nothing really that can be done. I think I played it fine. I mean, I could grab the pawn on h2 whenever I want, practically. And I mentioned rook h6 too, which makes a lot of sense. I mean, I rejected it because of this move, but as you can see, this move is also like -17, and I just have to calculate that he has nothing, nothing going when he checks me on d8. But when you're ahead like this, you're going to naturally look at the lines that secure you the victory in the safest way possible. So rook g6, queen here.
Check.
Came into g2, and then rook g4, and this is decisive. Guess rook f1 is possible. Idea that after check and his king moves, his queen does hold this. Yeah, I'm sure some combination of this, attacking the pawn, forces king back, maybe even just grabbing a pawn now. I'm sure that's going to win. We're up 3 pawns now. So he did this and then lost his queen. His king will get deflected away and we can take on f3. Okay, so hope you guys learned a thing or two about this particular variation, the b6 response to the c3 Sicilian, and also some aspects of trading were discussed and how you want to be making smart trades. Even when you're ahead, you don't just want to trade mindlessly because you're supposed to. So thank you guys for watching. I'll be back tomorrow with another 15-minute game. Talk to you guys later. Bye.